Hello, and in the previous lesson we learned how to integrate the template layout from the main layout file into one of our views, the index view. And as a quick reminder, the way we did it was to first extend it from the main layout and then encapsulate the entire content of the index, which is a list or a table visualization list of all the contacts, and encapsulate it or sandwich it inside a section. As a reminder, we are calling this section a content, and we need to make sure that the entire project will make a reference to this section. So any view will have a section with the name content. Finally, we simply yield the content from the main layout like so. If we look at what the app looks like at the moment, you can visit the URL of your virtual machine and make sure you are in the /contacts route. This is the route of the index view that returns the index view, and at the moment we are simply seeing a static table. It is important to appreciate that these rows are hard-coded and are not retrieved from the database. So in this lesson I'm going to show you how you can retrieve the actual tables from a database. First of all, we need to open the contact controller file, because all the business logic is going to be found inside the controller. At the moment, the method that returns the contacts index view is called index. So we need to have some sort of variable which we will call contacts, and this variable is going to be calling the model contact and calling the static method all. So we will be returning all contacts and saving them to this variable. Finally, we want to use the compact function like we did previously with the show function, so that we will return the contacts variable to the index view. So now let's head to the index view and remove all of these rows except one. We need at least one row as a reference for our HTML formatting. So I am going to remove most of the rows, leaving just one of the rows. Let's save and double check that I have one of the rows. So now I can programmatically loop on the for each. With the for each on the contacts variable which we passed a moment ago through the controller. It makes sense that before looping, we check whether that variable actually contains some rows. So this condition first check whether the context is empty or not, and if it is not empty, we are looping through that variable, and for each variable I am going to have the placeholder as an associative array, like so. Remember that the context variable that we get from the controller is always in the form of an associative array. At this stage, if you forget how to loop an associative array, I recommend to check the VLE for the nodes. So now we can copy and paste. Actually, we can cut the entire static row and paste it inside the loop. The idea is that we want to regenerate the data from a programming point of view or dynamically. In other words, now that we have access to the context variable and specifically to both index and contact, we can simply replace each of these hard-coded values with the actual data from the database, like so. Remember that in order to use Laravel expressions, we need to embed them inside double curly braces. If you forgot what are your fields, now it is a good time to check the migration files. Now for the company, remember that we have a relationship called company, so we can actually access the company name like so. Again, if you forget, remember to make reference, in this case, to the model. Remember that the contact model has access to the company relationship, which in turn will give us access to the name as well to the rest of the fields. In our case, we only need the name. So now let's save the file and reload the browser. And as you can see, we have all the data from the database being rendered accordingly. So now we have successfully reading the data from the database and displaying it to the user. The next core feature that we need to do is to show a contact detail. So in other words, as you can notice here, while each contact is being represented in its separate row, I want to have the ability to click on the first button and show the relevant detail of a particular contact in a fashionable visualized format. So the first thing that I would like to do is to try and update the hyperlink of this button, which at the moment is redirecting to some HTML file, and instead we needed to link to the show view or the context.show view. So the first thing is trying to locate this hyperlink button, which is in my case line 57. We need to update the hyperlink destination to the route contexts.show. If you remember, this particular route context.show accepts one other parameter, which is the contact ID. This should not be that difficult, because if you remember, we have access to the context and specifically to the specific contact variable, including the contact ID. So as the second parameter, we can simply access it like so. Contact arrow ID. So if we go back to our contact list, if we click on this button, on the left hand side, on the bottom left hand side, you can clearly see that it is now linking to /contacts/1. It is not something which we hard-coded, it is something which was captured programmatically from this particular record. If we take a different record, let's say Bob Builder, line 9, we can see that this time it is trying to redirect to /contacts/9, so on and so forth. If we click on the button, we are redirected to the show contacts route, which in turn returns the show contact view, or the context.show view, which is this one here. So the next thing that we need to do is to apply the theme or the layout that we created inside the index view, this time on the show view. Now is the perfect time to pause the video and try it out yourself. So as a reminder, in our Bootstrap template which we downloaded, there is a HTML file called show.html, whose purpose is actually to render a customer or anything that we prefer into a beautiful card which has a card header and a card body. So I suggest to copy the entire content from lines 38 to 104 and paste it instead of the contact details that you have inside the show view. But before, let's do the same. Extends layouts.main, section content and section, and inside here we simply paste the code like so. So if we reload the browser, we should see the contact detail. Like before, we are only seeing a static version. So we need to again go through each of these fields and replace it with the actual value of the contact. Now, it is important to remember that the show view, the contact or show view, has already access to the contact variable we did last time during the controller and router lesson. So we don't need to do any further updates to the contact controller. So what we need to do is find each value and replace it with the variable like so. While we're here, I also suggest to update the hyperlink which says cancel and instead route the user to the index route, like so. Save and reload the browser. As you can see, now the screen is displaying the actual data from the database, and if we press cancel, we go back to the list of the contacts. So in this lesson, we learned how to render dynamic content by displaying all the contacts and also displaying a particular contact.